Okay, Be'ezras Hashem, let's try to finish up tonight. And for tonight, I would like to learn Rishonim and Achronim. And more than going through, like Rabbi Barrow Wine, going through Rishonim and Achronim, I think it's more important to get an overview of what's going on and where everything fits into each other. That's more of a Tayelis in Rishonim and Achronim. So let's begin. We learned Be'ezras Hashem, the Tanam and Amoraim. The Tanam were in Eretz Yisrael. The Amoraim were for the first 100 years in Eretz Yisrael and Bavel. Then it was only in Bavel. Then came the period of the Go'inim. The Go'inim were in Bavel, and they were in Surah and Pumbedisa, and whichever one was more important, whichever one was less important, with the Rish Galusa. And it was a time of like a dark hole, as we said. We don't have records of it. We don't know much that went on. If we're lucky, we have a list of 50 names of different Ga'inim that ran, and the Rish Galusas that ran Bavel during that time. If we're lucky, we could find maybe 20, 30 Svarim. I doubt that we could get so much. What in the world happened during that time? It's a period of 500 years. That's like from 500 years is from in the middle of the second bias all the way to Chasimas Talmud. That's quite a very long time. We have a lot of what happened during that time. Tanoim and Amoraim. 500 years is more than the whole Beis Hamikdash. 500 years. What happened during that time? But interestingly, in the world also it's a black hole. Rome collapsed. And when Rome collapsed, the whole western part of Rome collapsed, and like they went back. It was a setback of hundreds, if not thousands of years. There's thoughts that maybe the Romans already had invented cars and helicopters and all these things, and then suddenly everything collapsed, and they went back to the primitive, and just like the whole world retraced its steps and went back. It's an incredible thing. Now, from that came the Islamic world. Muhammad came up, and although the people in Bavel were spared the Romans, the people in Bavel were spared the Greeks. However, Islam stationed itself mamash in Asia, in that part of Asia where the Yidden were, and eventually became difficult to be part of there, to live there in Iran and Iraq, and because of just influence, the world started connecting, the world started to wake up. So people started to travel to Europe. Europe started to become a tourist center. And although the whole Jewish world would always support the Ga'inim and the Rish Galusa and Pumbedisa and Surah, and relied heavily on outside funds, suddenly they had to collect for their own funds. And they were supporting their own Talmidei Chacham. And not everything was from there. And add to that it was starting to become difficult. Slowly everyone started moving out of Bavel. Slowly everyone started moving out of that. And finally when Rav Hai Goyen died, then it was considered to be the end of it. That was more or less in the middle of the first, the 1000s. And now Rav Hai Goyen died. Rav Hai Goyen died. Now the Ga'inim area is over. We know the story of the Abba Shvuyim, the 4 captives, that they were spread out into different places in Europe, and Europe started to wake up, and Europe started to become the central place of Torah. Now, a pirate ship. A pirate ship captured a boat, and on there was 4 Gedolei Olam on the ship, and they brought them to 4 different ports. I'm sorry, they brought them to 4 different ports, and the 4 different ports, they were sold as slaves. And Punklich, those places had big yeshuvim, and those yeshuvim realized that the slave is not Stam a slave. He's a Goyen Olam, who's Rabbi Chanano's father, Rabbi Chushil, Rabbi Chanano's father. I don't know, different, I forgot the names of the people. It
happened 4 times?
No, in one ship. In one ship, there were 4 Gedolei Olam on the ship.
Each time they stopped, the city recognized
that this was a great person, and they were paid him, and they bought him as a slave, and they made him into a yeshiva, and that became a very big center. And again, this is all how Europe started to become the center. They built them into real B'nai Torah. They made them into very, very real B'nai Torah. They made them into a Mokum of Torah, and Europe started to wake up and suddenly become a place of Torah, and therefore the whole Bavel, and it was getting hard to live there. I mean, there was no like one story that killed it. You understand? The Romans chased them out of Eretz Yisrael. Done. Eretz Yisrael was over. They're now in Bavel. There was no story that chased them out of Bavel. It just became harder and harder and harder. So it just naturally shifted to Europe.
But last anyway, he was killed. There was somebody like for 2 years.
Yeah. So there was a little, and it could be even more than that. It was more. It didn't really end. The times of the Rambam, there were people still there.
I'm saying, but when he was killed, I think that was the end.
You're fine. Yeah. Fine. I'm not. Great. Yes, I appreciate that. Okay. So now, I think a very, very important thing that's really pashut, but if we never thought of it, it never clicked. Just to connect the dots. In a map of Europe, just to appreciate Europe, terrible map. I'm not here to draw a map, and to bring a map would just make everyone space out and just would overwhelm. But we have the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea almost comes together by Africa and Europe. This is Europe. And this is the Mediterranean Sea, and this is Eretz Yisrael. So this is Europe, this is Africa. Now, this is Spain. Spain and Portugal. Spain, Portugal. And on top of Spain and Portugal is France. And here's England. Right? So then we have France, and after France we have Switzerland, and we have Germany. Then we have Hungary, and then we have Poland, and Lithuania, Lithuania. Then we have Russia, and Russia is just humongous. Russia is 14 time zones, right? So 14 time zones. Russia is all the way here, and Russia ends 30 miles away from Alaska. So Russia is just like Russia as well. Russia as well. So we have over here. We have to understand. I want to make two differentiations. I'm sorry. Can we see this? Got it. So there's such a thing called there's Eastern Europe and there's Western Europe. Oh, I have another color. There's Eastern Europe and there's Western Europe. We have to appreciate Rishonim is Western Europe. Achrayim is Eastern Europe. Let's just appreciate the difference between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Sometimes Europe is just Europe. Eastern Europe is what we're familiar with Europe. It's Lithuania and Poland and Russia and all those places. Those places are more, I don't want to use the wrong words. I come from there. It's more simple. It's more primitive. They're not so... For example, in England, in France, and Spain, there's much more into universities, much more into culture, much more into advancements, much more style in the Western Europe. Just as a good example, when your grandfather comes, right? So we all think about before World War II, there were bathrooms, there weren't bathrooms, there was like, we think of like the Mir and Lithuania and Vilna, and these places were farmlands, and then they had to travel to the city. If they were lucky, you know, the train was there, and then you hear about these people who grew up in Germany, here in the United States. Like many of our houses were built in the early 1900s, right? And there was electricity, and bathrooms, and plumbing, and things were going on, and there were cars, and people living in the Lower East Side, and there were big buildings that are still around now. And it was more or less now. So like in the early 1900s, in England, in France, in Germany, in Spain, it was more or less like now. They had phones with offices and things going on with yeshivas, with first grade and second grade and third grade, with a manal and I don't know if they had the copy machine, but they had normal things. Eastern Europe was always behind. Eastern Europe was always behind. So we should just appreciate the Rishonim were in Western Europe. Western Europe was more cultured, was more Western Europe. That's what Western Europe, and that's where we're going to find the Rishonim, and that's where we're focusing on Rishonim. They didn't even come to Eastern Europe until much later, possibly much later, they came to Eastern Europe. And therefore, like in Poland, they first came in the 1400s, and all these places in Eastern Europe, and then comes back, it's not fair, it's even bigger. All right, so it's more here, and then they first came to Eastern Europe. So Rishonim is in Western Europe. That's the first division. Second division is, we can make a division this way also. There's lower and there's higher. Marker's exploded. There's lower and there's higher. The lower is the Sephardim. The lower is the Sephardim. The Sephardim are in Spain, are in Portugal, and here's Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia. The northern part of Africa and Spain is all Sephardim. And like Spain juts down, so you have the whole Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is from the top to the bottom, and then Spain comes into the Mediterranean. Just like Italy shoots out into the Mediterranean, it's a peninsula, so the Iberian Peninsula is Spain and Portugal. Actually, Africa also juts out a little bit, and they almost touch each other by the Rock of Gibraltar. It almost touches each other, and there's where Europe meets Africa, and that whole bottom area is the Sephardi world, is Spain, which also includes the northern part of Africa.
But Gibraltar was part of Western Europe?
Again?
Gibraltar was still considered part of Western?
Yeah, it's still part of Europe. And then you have the upper part, which Germany is Ashkenaz, but it's really France and England and all those, Denmark, Sweden is all part of the world of Ashkenaz. A very, very, very big difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim really shaped how the Rishonim ended up coming along. And that's as follows. They always had problems with Goyim. Spain was never the best place to live in. It had the golden era, and people were killed, pogroms, it was better, it was worse. But in Spain, they more or less made it till the end of the 1400s. They were there in Spain, sometimes better, sometimes worse, sometimes amazing, sometimes not so good. But then Spain came to a halt, done, and the expulsion in Spain, and it was over. In the northern part of Europe, I mean, in the Ashkenaz part, it was terrible. It was no good. It was good. It was no good. There was the Crusades and pogroms and terrible. But even though they got kicked out of England in the 1300s, and they got kicked out of France, and they never officially ever got kicked out of Germany, but there was many different countries. So if they got kicked out of England, they were in France. If they got kicked out of France, they were in Germany. They got kicked out in Germany, they were here. So Ashkenaz never came to an end. Sephardi came to an end. So again, they never had it great. And even the Sephardim had the ups and downs. And the Sephardim, Spain and Portugal, and the top half of the northern part of Africa was never the center, so they may have never gotten like totally kicked out of there, or it's hard to. But once they got kicked out of Spain, it was the end of that. So therefore, we're going to erase the map, but we should just appreciate two things. Again, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. It's interesting that even Germany itself, I didn't mean to draw the line, but it worked out very nicely. Even Germany itself, it was divided between Western Germany, West Germany, and East Germany. And West Germany was more liberated, was more capitalistic, and East Germany turned out to be more communist. And East Germany, it was just more to the east. It became part of Eastern Europe, and West Germany became part of West Europe.
Even way back, even by the
No, I don't know, but it was like the divide of Germany really highlights the difference of Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Western Europe was open, was more into culture, into university, into this, and then the Eastern Europe was different. And then again, we have Ashkenaz on top, and we have Sfard. So the Crusades ruined the continuous flow of Europe, but again, they managed to move around. So if we could divide the Rishonim, I think it would be very, very helpful to divide the Rishonim into 4 groups. And the 4 groups is not so much at the time periods, although it is, but it's more or less will give us a way to categorize Rishonim and where they come from. Now, the first group of Rishonim is in the beginning. Is more of the Baalei Halacha of the Rishonim, and you have the Rif, and you have the Rambam, you have, it's not fair, the Rambam is later, Rabbeinu Gershon, and they were the early Rishonim, and they were all Sfardim, and the Rif was in Fez in Morocco, and the Rambam was in Spain, and Rabbeinu Gershon, no, maybe it could be he was more in that. Okay, and this was the Baalei Halacha, they were Kaveya, the Baalei Halacha, the Bahag, and now we have.
Margali left. He got kicked out, right?
Who?
Rabbeinu Gershon.
Rabbeinu Gershon got kicked out from. Could be. Okay.
Bahag was very earlier.
Huh? What was earlier? I'm talking, it was like mamish the beginning of the Rishonim. Fine. Is the Baalei, is the Rishonim. Then we have is Rashi, the Taisus. Taisus is all the yeshivas of Rashi, understanding Rashi. So this is more al derech on the page itself. On the page itself we have Rashi, and we have the Baalei Taisus, were the yeshivas that learned up the Rashis and agreed with the Rashis, argued with the Rashis. We have Rashi's daughter married Rabbeinu Meir, who was the Rivam, and the Rashbam, and Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbeinu Yaakov, Rabbeinu Tam, and then we have the Ri from the Baalei Taisus, and then we have all the other Baalei Taisus, the Rashbi Shantz, correct? And that was all in France, and some Taisus Angalia, right? Anglia was from England, the Ri Meir Orleans was England, Germany, France, and they were the whole yeshivas of the Baalei Taisus, which ended with the Crusades. They had to live with the Crusades, and the Crusades, unfortunately, was just a group of thugs running through Europe trying to conquer Eretz Yisrael from the Arabs, which the Arabs were taking over. If they wouldn't have done it, the Arabs were taken over. Not they really succeeded anything lasting, but they managed to ruin everything. And here we have the Rishonim, we have Rashi and Taisus on the page in the Ashkenaz world.
What year was the?
Oh, so okay, I'm sorry. So this is, let's say, we'll say from 1000, let's say 1050. The Rambam is really later, so we're extending it to, let's say, 1200. This is really this is also 1050 to the 1200s. Yeah? Now, in the 1200s to 1300, here we have in Spain, the Sephardi we have the Ramban, whose Talmud was the Rashba, whose Talmud was the Ritva, whose Talmud, the Ran. The Ran was the Nemukei Yosef, whose Talmud was the Nemukei Yosef. And here we have the Rishonim on the page. The Rishonim, the Sifra Rishonim, the Rashba, the Ritva, the Ramban, is Avkan. This is, the problem is that you learn, this is also all Sephardi. And this is the Ashkenaz. So you learn the whole sugya, and you have a Shver Ramban, right, with the Rashba and and all this, and then you have a Rambam, all this, and then Halach L'maisa, no shaykhs. We don't know. It became into somewhere else. The answer is because in Ashkenaz we also had other Baalei Halacha who came up afterwards in 1300s and later, let's say to the 1400s, and that was the Rosh and the Tor and the Trumas Hadeshin, who was very, very weighs heavily in the Beis Yosef, and it comes up lahalacha. The Ramah is always going Trumas Hadeshin and the Marivayel, which if you learn Beis Yosef comes up all the time on the Marivayel, and the Shibbolei Aleket, and suddenly there's like a new world. So we can have the Rambam, and we can have different Rishonim and the Chuvas HaRashba and the Ritva, and they have all the lumdus in the Sugya. And no shechus halacha l'maisa. We're gonna go with it. We go to more Rashi, Taisvis, Rosh, Tur. So this is the early Rishonim, this is the later Rishonim, and this is all Ashkenaz. And then we have the Sfardi Rishonim, which is the Bali Halacha, the Rif, the Rambam, the Bahag. Rabbeinu Gershom is half and half. And then we have the Mefarshim on the Talmud, which was the next century, which is the Ramban, the Rashba, the Ritva, the Ran, and the Mukhe Yosef. So, again, this ended, done. It was totally over by the Garush of Sfarad, and that whole yeshiva was over. And here, they had to move. They were first in England, they were in France, then they was kicked out of England, kicked out of France, they were in Germany, and they went through Europe. But they managed, as far as the Ashkenazim managed to continue on, although not necessarily the same thing. However, the Sephardim was an abrupt end to the Sephardim, and I think it's a good way to just divide the Rishonim into 4 different things. Again, we have the beginning of the Rishonim, which is the Rif and the Rambam, and then we have the Sephardim later on, which is the Mefarshim on the page that we learn. As we say, we learn it for Seder. And then we have the Rashi Taisus, which is the bread and butter of Shas. And then we have the later Ashkenaz Paiskim at the end. And then they were all in Western Europe. Then Svara, the Garush of Svara, the 1492, really changed the whole dynamics, because then they all had to leave. And once they had to leave, they went to Eastern Europe, and they went to Eastern Europe, they went to Eretz Yisrael, then they left. Once they left, the whole Europe changed over, and now Eastern Europe became populated, and that really began the Achrayim. Another thing that really began the Achrayim was the printing press. So the printing press was in the late 1400s, and suddenly the printing press changed everything. So it's not a question of like being mechadish or so much learning from your Rebbe. Suddenly everything was available. And then became a lot of likutim, and now explaining the likutim. So it changed the learning. And if we could just go through Achrayim, good? Just to go through Achrayim into Achrayim. So the Achrayim, we have the beginning of the Achrayim is more or less as someone said it very, very well. As someone said, the Shulchan Aruch is the 1500s. The Netzikelim on around it is the 1600s, and everyone around that is the 1700s. No, the ones in the small letters all around are the 1700s, and just that says all the rest. Anyways, so you have the Rishonim, you have the 1500s. This is already Achrayim. In the 1500s, we have the Beis Yosef. We still have, this is now the golden era in Tzfas over there with the Beis Yosef, with the Ramak, with Reb Shlomo Alkovitz. We even have Reb Tzal Ashkenazi, who is still explaining, still writing a Shita Mekubetzes on the page of the Gemara. But now, more or less, he gets off the page of the Gemara, and now suddenly we're into Halacha. We have the Beis Yosef, and we have the Ramah, and with the Ramah over there, now the Ramah is already in Krakow. The Ramah is already in Eastern Europe. And with the Ramah over there, we also have the Maharshal. The Maharshal is very, very strong in Psak. The Maharshal, Shlomo Luria wrote the Maharshal on the back of the page, wrote the Yam Shel Shlomo. And the Maharshal is from the early Achrayim, who, again, in the same time, did the Beis Yosef. And then we have the 1600s. The 1600s are more the Mefarshei Shulchan Aruch. We have, in the 1600s, the Magen Avram. Now this is all in Eastern Europe. The Magen Avram, and the Taz, and the Sma. In the 1600s, who did I? 1 second. Who did I leave out? Oh, we have the Maharshal and the Maram, right, in Lublin. And now suddenly we're in Germany. Now we're more in Eastern Europe. And That's the 1600s. Then we have the 1700s. 1700s is already, we have already the Gra and the Baal Shem. But then we also have the Pnei Yeshua and the Ktsais and the Nesivas. Yeah? And there's already the 1700s. That's, and then once you have the 1800s, then it's already, I mean, I don't want to call it current events, but then once you have the 1800s, now already you have the yeshivas with the chassidus, and now everything starts taking shape, and the identities that we still have today were first born then in the 1800s, and the whole Eastern Europe divided with the 1800s with the yeshivas and the chassidus and all the tshuvas farm and all what was going on in Eastern Europe during that time. And then the 1900s, gotta get to COVID, no? and then we have the 1900s. The 1900s, I think we're all familiar with the 1900s, and then we have the 2000s.
Zugins, 1900s.
Huh? The 1900s, we have the Chofetz Chaim. Very good. And then suddenly it started shifting over to America. And then, as you know, the Kim Haven Darko started preparing America so that when, unfortunately, they couldn't be in Europe anymore, already America was there. And then we have Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael wakes up in the 1900s. And from the beginning of the 1900s, I mean, just think of the 100 years, from 1900 to the year 2000. Eretz Yisrael goes from nothing to incredible. In the year 2000, Eretz Yisrael is a knocking the place with thousands and thousands, if not a million people, million Bnei Torah already in. That was the 1900s, and now everyone shifts out of Europe, or 1945, that's it, Europe was over, and then they came to America, and then we have the shape of the Torah world today. But I think it's just appreciating just to chap where everyone is, that the 1500s is the Beis Yosef, the Ramah, writing the Shulchan Aruch, writing the Beis Yosef, writing the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, writing the Ramah and all, but the Marshal weighed very heavily during that time. Then the main yeshivas during those times, in the 1600s, what?
Maharil.
The Maharil. The Maharil was...
Is
the Maharil.
Is that the same as Marival?
No. The Marival is not the Maharil. I don't know. Good question, I don't know. And the Marshal and the Maram were the Ikar yeshivas over there in Europe. They were the Ikar yeshivas over there, with the Marshal and the Maram, and they wrote like the bread and butter on the page in terms of Achreinim, and then all the Achreinim, all the raid that we have is all the 1700s, and then the 1900s is also the Briska Mahalach with Reb Chaim Briska and.
What were they writing for? Just to bring out the Lushim? Was it based on? Were they trying to bring out Psak?
Oh, the Ktsais is Psak. Ktsais and Nesivas is Psak. Reb Kiveger. Kiveger was the late 1700s. Some Sefer. I don't know. There's a lot, but that I think we're more familiar. It's not so much, world history.
And Rabbi Selengut says yeshivas, Maram, Marshal, I can't say.
Oh, so the question is, what do yeshivas mean?
Right.
That's a big question. What does it mean? Reb Chaim Volozhin is the start of yeshivas. What do you mean start of yeshivas? What did they do before? They didn't have yeshivas. So it's a good question. I think the kunz of yeshiva is that there's ben azmanim, and it's true. The kunz of the yeshiva is that, like, during this man, it's a chak lo yaver. So it's not a question of is bittul Torah yeh bittul. During the yeshiva, we're dead to the world, and we learn in a sidrei yeshiva. So instead of having a rav, and the people would learn by the rav, and it was very informal, and everyone would find where to eat, and everyone would find where to sleep, and everyone would find the starim, and there wasn't such a formal seder that you learned to this yeshiva, learned to this yeshiva, you went to learn by him, you went to learn by him, you went to learn by him. It wasn't a formal place. Here, suddenly everything was in a box. Now, a box means that there's out of a box, but inside the box is the tents, and then there's outside the box. Like, you understand? So the yeshivas, everything became very, regimented and formal, and you stayed here and had his man, and we're going to learn this and we're going to learn that, and then you're going to go learn by him. And so the whole thing to just make it organized and to make it a system came up in the yeshivas, and then the chassidim. Chassidim is its own world, coming off from the Baal Shem. And I'm saying the question is, where did Torah start from? The Gra of the Baal Shem. There's no. It ended up two different places, and now today it's coming back. You go to all the yeshivas, they have chassidim, right? And then by the chassidim, they're all learning yeshivish as far as. So now in the chassidim, there's different chassidim. In the chassidim, there's more Polish chassidus, and there's more Russian chassidus, and there's the more. You know what I'm saying? So the Polish chassidus are. So Poland is more close to Lithuania. They're more learning yeshiva zachen. They're more serious. Stalin and Ger, and they're more serious and more. And then you have Hungary and the Russian, and that's more warmth and more geschmack. Hungary, I shouldn't say that. Hungary is more culture. Glitter is more the Hungarian chassidus. And then the Russian Chassidus is more the Chabad, and is more the Breslev, and and then in the yeshivas you have the different yeshivas. You have the Brisk, and you have Kelm, and you have Navardik, and you have Slobodka, and each one had their styness of what they would focus on again. But that's all, and of course things played a very, very big role in it, but I think it was just to give a general sense that Rashi Tosfos is there, and then the Rosh and the Torah is the later Rishonim, and here we have. I think it says it the best. The middle of the page of the Shulchan Aruch is the 1500s. The around it is the 1600s, and it also goes on the page, like the page of the Gemara is the Rishonim. And then in the back already is the 1600s, and then goes to the 1700s is all the lengthy pshatim, the lengthy mafarshim in the back of the Shulchan Aruch, and then goes already the 1800s is the 1800s, and then the 1900s all the way until COVID is Kaveya the. And
then when we talk about the Ramah, the Marshal, each of them, they all sat in their shuls and their Batim Midrashim together with the Talmidim, and as a Tzazamenschaft, the work was put together, or this was an individual Gadol sitting, not Gadol, Achrein, right? Achrein sitting and working through Sugyas Me Aleph Ad Tov and printing or writing out his maskanas.
I hear. I'm guessing it's both, because it seems that all the Rosh Yeshivas were really Rabbanim, like more like the Chassidim have. Like they were more the Rabbanim who were paskening. Throughout the Goinim wrote Svarim, but mostly it's Tshuvas HaGoinim. Even the Rishonim was Tshuvas, and even all this was more Tshuvas responding to what was going on. Now the Shulchan Aruch is not Tshuvas; it was also a sefer he was writing, but almost until recently, until like Reb Chaim Ozer in the middle of 1900s, a Rav was also the Reb Kiveger. Was also the yeshiva was also responding to all the tshuvas. Like suddenly became, you could have a Rosh Yeshiva and a Rav. You know what I'm saying? Like two different worlds. You have the Rosh Yeshiva not answering, but a lot of the Chedushim, Rav Moshe Feinstein was a Rosh Yeshiva and a Rav, and his Chedushim were coming out mitoch hapsak. It didn't make for him to be a great Rosh Yeshiva. It made for him to be a great gadol. He would always bemoan that his Igros Moshe everyone bought, his Divros Moshe no one bought. So the style of learning took on its own characteristic that didn't necessarily lead to a result of psak. No? So, yeah. It changed. But it seems from all the Achrenim that they were paiskim. And it came out of the psak that they were writing all these things. Okay, I think we completed our series, Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach. Thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah.
I think it's a nace that